You see, I'm working at the same job as Deborah, and something very awkward has happened." "Yes," said Tuppence. "What is it?" "Well, you see, Deborah's found out that you're not down in Cornwall as she thought, and that makes it a bit awkward, doesn't it, for you?" "Oh, no," said Tuppence, concerned. "How did she find out?" Tony Marsden explained. He went on. "Deborah, of course, has no idea of what you're really doing, and it's important that she shouldn't know. My job, you see, is the same as yours. I'm supposed to be a beginner in the coding department. In fact, my instructions are to express views that are mildly fascist, admiration of the German system, suggestions that an alliance with Hitler wouldn't be a bad thing, just to see what response I get. There's a good deal of dangerous talk like that going on, you see, and we want to find out who's behind it." "Dangerous talk everywhere," thought Tuppence. "But as soon as Deb told me about you," continued the young man, "I thought I'd better come straight down and warn you so that you can make up a story she'll believe. You see, I happen to know what you are doing, and that it's of vital importance. It would be fatal if any hint of who you are was discovered. I thought perhaps you could pretend you'd joined Captain Beresford in Scotland, or wherever he is. You might say to Deborah that you'd been allowed to work with him there." "I might do that, certainly," said Tuppence thoughtfully. Tony Marsden said anxiously, "You don't think I'm interfering?" No, I'm very grateful to you." Well, you see, I'm rather fond of Deborah," admitted Tony. Tuppence smiled at him. After a moment or two, she said slowly, "My husband isn't in Scotland." "Isn't he?" "No, he's down here with me. At least he was. Now, he's disappeared." "Oh, that's bad. Or isn't it? Has he discovered something?" Tuppence nodded. "I think so. That's why I don't think that his disappearance is really a bad sign. I think sooner or later he'll communicate with me, in his own way." She smiled a little. Tony said with some embarrassment, "Of course, you know how all of this works, I expect, but you ought to be careful." Tuppence nodded. "I know what you mean. Beautiful heroines in books are always easily tricked. But Tommy and I have our methods. We've got a saying," she smiled. "Penny plain and tuppence coloured." "What?" The young man stared at her as though she had gone mad. "I ought to explain that my family nickname is Tuppence. I won't go into why. So when Tommy and I want the other to know a letter is definitely from one of us, we use at least part of that old phrase, sometimes spelling plain as P-L-A-Y-N-E. Originally, you know, it referred to the cardboard scenes made for toy theatres, which were very popular with families who put on the plays at home. You could buy plain scenes for a penny, but coloured ones cost tuppence." "Oh, I see." The young man grinned. "Very clever." "I hope so." "Can I help in any way?" "Yes," said Tuppence thoughtfully. "I think perhaps you can." Chapter 11. After long hours of unconsciousness, Tommy woke up with an aching head. Slowly, he became aware of other things, of cold, stiff arms and legs, of hunger, of not being able to move his lips, and that his head was resting on solid stone. Yes, he was lying on hard stones, and he was in pain, unable to move, extremely hungry, cold and uncomfortable. Surely, although Mrs. Perenna's beds had never been soft, this could not be. Then he remembered. Of course, Haydock, the transmitter, the German waiter. Turning in at the gates of Sans-Souci, someone had struck him down. So Haydock hadn't been quite such a fool. Either he'd followed him, or maybe Appledore had. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, could just see a small rectangle of pale light, a tiny window slightly open. It was cold, and the air smelt damp. He was, he thought, lying in a cellar. His hands and feet were tied, and there was a gag in his mouth, secured by a bandage. I'm really in trouble now, thought Tommy. At that moment, a door was pushed open. Appledore came in and set a candle on the ground and a tray on which was a jug of water, a glass, and some bread and cheese. He said in a quiet voice, I am about to take the gag off. You will then be able to eat and drink. If, however, you make the slightest sound, I will replace it immediately. As soon as Tommy's mouth was free, Appledore held the glass to his lips. The water did him the world of good. He murmured stiffly, That's better. I'm not quite so young as I was. Now for the food, Fritz. Or is it Franz? The man said quietly, My name here is Appledore. He held the slice of bread and cheese up, and Tommy ate it hungrily. After another drink of water, Tommy asked, And what's the next part of the program? For an answer, Appledore replaced the gag and went out. Tommy was left in darkness. Some time later, he was awakened from a confused sleep by the sound of the door opening. This time, Haydock and Appledore came in together. The gag was removed, and the ropes that held his arms were loosened so that he could sit up and stretch his arms. Haydock had a pistol with him. Tommy, without much inner confidence, began to play his part. He said indignantly, Look here, Haydock, what's the meaning of all this? I've been attacked, kidnapped. The commander was shaking his head. He remarked coldly, Don't waste your breath. You play your role very well, but it's of no importance to me whether you're a member of the British intelligence or merely a clever amateur. How dare you? That's enough, Meadows. I tell you. Haydock thrust his angry face forwards. Be quiet, damn you. Earlier on it would have mattered to find out who you were and who sent you. Now it doesn't. The time's short, you see. And you didn't have the chance to report to anyone what you'd found out. The police will be looking for me as soon as I'm reported missing. Haydock showed his teeth in a sudden smile. I've had the police here. Good men. Both friends of mine. They were very concerned about your disappearance, but it's quite clear that you left this house well and alive. They would never dream of looking for you here. You can't keep me here forever, Tommy said. Haydock said, putting on his most British manner, It won't be necessary, my dear fellow. Only until tomorrow night. A boat will arrive at my little cove, and we're sending you on a voyage for your health. Though I don't think you'll be alive, or even on board when it arrives at its destination. Why didn't you kill me straight away? It's such hot weather, my dear fellow. Just occasionally our sea communications are interrupted, and if that were to happen, well, in this heat, if there was a delay, a dead body would soon become very obvious. I see, said Tommy. He did see. He was to be kept alive until the boat arrived. Then he would be killed, and his dead body taken out to sea. Nothing would ever connect his body, when found, with Smuggler's Rest. I just came along, continued Haydock, to ask whether there is anything we could do for you afterwards. Tommy reflected. Then he said, Thanks, but I won't ask you to take a lock of my hair to my wife or anything of that kind. She'll only miss me when I stop paying the bills, but I dare say she'll soon find a friend elsewhere. He felt he must create the impression that he was operating alone. If no one became suspicious of Tuppence, then the game might still be won.
"As you please," said Haydock.
"If you did wish to send a message to your friend, we would see that it was delivered." So he was anxious to get a little information. Tommy shook his head. "Nothing. No message." "Very well." Haydock nodded to Appledore. The latter replaced the ropes and the gag. The two men went out, locking the door behind them. Tommy felt anything but cheerful. He faced a rapidly approaching death, with no means of leaving any clue behind him about the information he had discovered. His body was completely helpless. His brain felt completely inactive. There was, of course, still Tuppence, but whoever Tuppence might suspect, it would not be Haydock. 2 witnesses had proved that Tommy had left Smuggler's Rest alive and well. Damn it all, if only he had been more on his guard. If only he could get his mouth free, he could shout for help. Somebody might hear through that tiny window high up in one corner of the room, though it was very unlikely. For the next half hour, he tried to loosen the ropes that they had tied him up with and bite through the gag. It was all hopeless, however. Haydock and Appledore knew their business. It was, he judged, late afternoon. Haydock, he guessed, had gone out. He had heard no sounds from overhead. He was probably playing golf, discussing with his friends at the clubhouse the mystery of what had happened to Meadows. "He dined with me that night and seemed quite normal. Then he just disappeared into the blue." Tommy groaned with fury. That cheerful English manner. It was wonderful what a first-class actor could convince people of. So, here he was, a complete failure, tied up like a chicken. What was that? He strained his ears, listening to a far-off sound. Only some man singing a song. And here he was, unable to make a sound to attract anyone's attention. The singing came nearer. A most untuneful noise. But the song was recognizable. It dated from the last war, and had been revived for this one. "If you were the only girl in the world, and I was the only boy." How often he had sung that in 1917, but this fellow simply couldn't sing in tune. Suddenly, Tommy's body grew tense. Surely there was only one person who always went wrong in that particular way. Albert, thought Tommy. Albert, prowling round Smuggler's Rest, and here he was, unable to move hand or foot, unable to make a sound. Wait a minute. Was he? There was just one sound, not so easy with the mouth shut as with the mouth open, but it could be done. Desperately, Tommy began to snore. He snored and snored. Short snore, short snore, short snore. Pause. Long snore, long snore, long snore. Pause. Short snore, short snore, short snore. Tommy was snoring the Morse code. Dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. SOS, the international signal that someone needed help. Chapter 12. Although Tuppence went to bed in an optimistic mood, she suffered a severe reaction in those early morning hours when human hope sinks to its lowest. On going down to breakfast, however, her spirits rose with a sight of a letter sitting on her plate, addressed in awkward handwriting. Tuppence opened the letter. Dear Patricia, Auntie Grace is, I am afraid, much worse today. The doctors do not actually say she is dying, but I am afraid that there cannot be much hope. If you want to see her before the end, I think you should come today. If you take the 10:20 train to Yarrow, a friend will meet you with his car. Look forward to seeing you again, dear, in spite of the sad reason. Yours ever, Penelope Plain. It was all Tuppence could do to control her joy. Good old Penny Plain. After breakfast, Tuppence rang up the dressmakers and cancelled a fitting for a coat and skirt for that afternoon. She then went to see Mrs. Perenna and explained that she might be away from home for a night or two. She went up to her room to get ready. Betty Sproat came running out of the Cayleys' bedroom with a mischievous smile on her face. "What have you been doing?" demanded Tuppence. Betty gurgled. "Goosey, goosey, gander." Tuppence chanted, "Whither will you wander? Upstairs?" She lifted Betty high over her head. "Downstairs?" She rolled her on the floor. At this minute, Mrs. Sproat appeared, and Betty was taken off to be dressed for her walk. "Hide," said Betty hopefully. "Hide." "You can't play hide-and-seek now," said Mrs. Sproat. It was 10 o'clock as she left Sans Souci. She had plenty of time. She looked up at the sky, and in doing so stepped into a dark puddle by the gatepost. Without apparently noticing it, she went on. Her heart was dancing. Success! Success! They were going to succeed. Yarrow was a small country station where the village was some distance from the railway. A car was waiting outside the station. A good-looking young man was driving it. He touched 2 fingers to his cap to Tuppence, but the gesture of respect didn't seem to be one he was used to making. Tuppence kicked the front tire. "Isn't this rather flat?" "We haven't got far to go, madam." She nodded and got into the car. They drove not towards the village, but towards the hills. After taking a winding road over a hill, they took a side track that went down sharply into a deep valley. From the shadow of a small group of trees, a man stepped out to meet them. The car stopped, and Tuppence, getting out, went to meet Anthony Marsden. "Beresford's all right," he said quickly. "We located him yesterday. He's a prisoner. The 5th columnists captured him. And for good reasons, he's staying where he is for another 12 hours. You see, there's a small boat due in at a certain place, and we really want to catch it. That's why Beresford's not escaping. We don't want them to realise that we know what they're up to until the last minute." He looked at her anxiously. "You do understand, don't you?" "Oh, yes." Tuppence was staring at a strange mass of material that was half hidden by the trees. "He'll be absolutely all right," continued the young man seriously. "Of course Tommy will be all right," said Tuppence impatiently. "You needn't talk to me as though I was a child of 2. We're both ready to run a few risks. And what's that thing over there?" "Well," the young man hesitated. "That's just it. I've been ordered to put a certain proposal before you, but, well, frankly, I don't like doing it. You see—" Tuppence gave him a cold look. "Why don't you like doing it?" "Well, you're Deborah's mother, and I mean, what would Deb say to me if I were killed?" inquired Tuppence. "Personally, if I were you, I wouldn't mention it to her.